Imagine a cold dawn in the year 793 AD. The North Sea breeze carries the scent of salt and seaweed, and the waves gently touch the rocky shore of a small island off the northeast coast of England, Lindisfarne. At first glance, it was a place of peace. The monastery stood proud, not like a fortress, but like a beacon of faith. Here, monks lived a simple life. They prayed at sunrise, worked in silence during the day, and copied sacred texts by candlelight at night. The island was more than a religious site. It was a center of learning and culture. Pilgrims visited to seek blessings, traders stopped by to exchange goods, and travelers found refuge within its stone walls. Its relics and treasures were not guarded by swords or shields. Faith was its only defense. To the monks, the world beyond the horizon was distant and quiet. They knew little of the restless seas to the north, where rumors of seafaring warriors had begun to spread like whispers in the wind. The fields near the monastery were green with early summer, and the villagers nearby fished, farmed, and lived by the rhythm of the tides. Bells rang out across the island, calling everyone to prayer, their echo mixing with the cries of seabirds. No one imagined that these same bells would soon be drowned out by screams and steel. The monks wrote of God's protection. They believed their holy island was shielded by faith alone. Their manuscripts, painted with golden letters and rich colors, told stories of saints and miracles. Their lives were disciplined but not harsh, their days filled with prayer, farming, and teaching. Lindisfarne was known for its beauty, soft rolling grasslands, rocky cliffs, and a monastery that stood as a symbol of devotion. But beyond the misty horizon, change was coming. Far away, in the cold fjords of Scandinavia, men were sharpening axes, shaping longships, and whispering of lands rich with gold and undefended monasteries. The sea that once brought pilgrims and trade would soon bring something far more terrible. And so, as the sun set on Lindisfarne's calm and holy shores, the people had no idea they were standing on the edge of history. The dawn of the Viking Age was about to arrive with fire and blood. The morning mist clung to the sea like a thin veil. The monks of Lindisfarne went about their daily rituals, some tending the gardens, others preparing the morning prayers. The sky was gray but calm, the tide low. Then a sound broke the stillness. At first, it was only the distant cawing of seabirds, but beneath it, there was a rhythm, faint splashes, steady and purposeful. From the edge of the horizon, shadows began to form. Long and narrow, they cut through the fog like blades. At first, the monks thought they were ordinary trading vessels. After all, sailors from nearby coasts often came to barter goods or seek blessings. But as the shapes drew closer, the details became clear: carved dragon heads, tall curved prows, and oars moving in perfect unison. These were not traders. These were warships. The monks had never seen such vessels before. The long ships glided silently, their shallow hulls slicing the water with alarming speed. Each one carried men dressed in furs and leather, their helmets gleaming dully beneath the pale sun. The islanders watched from the shore, frozen between curiosity and dread. No warning had been sent, no messenger had run ahead. The raid was swift, silent, and deliberate. Fear spread like wildfire. Bells rang frantically, not for prayer this time, but for alarm. Villagers grabbed what few belongings they could carry. Some ran to the monastery, believing its holy walls would protect them. Others hid in the marshes and dunes, praying the strangers would pass them by. But the longships kept coming, their sails, striped in dark, filled with the sea wind. The carved dragon heads at their prows seemed to stare with lifeless hunger. To those on the island, it must have felt like the very monsters from their scriptures had come alive, a punishment, a plague sent from across the sea. The first of the ships scraped the shore with a hiss of pebbles. Warriors leapt into the shallows, axes and spears in hand, their boots splashing in the cold surf. Their language was harsh and sharp, their commands alien to the ears of the monks. In that moment, the world of Lindisfarne, its quiet, its prayers, its illusions of safety, cracked open. What had been a horizon of peace now held the promise of fire, steel, and chaos. The monks had prayed for salvation. Instead, the sea had delivered the storm. The first clash of steel against wood echoed like thunder across the island. The Viking raiders stormed the monastery grounds with a force the monks had never seen before. Their axes gleamed, their shields clashed, and their war cries pierced the air. The bells of Lindisfarne rang in panic, but they could not drown the sound of boots pounding on sacred floors. Monks tried to bar the doors with heavy beams, praying aloud as they pushed against the invading force. But the longships had not come to negotiate. They had come to plunder. With a violent crash, the doors splintered. The first wave of Vikings surged inside, their faces smeared with salt and sweat, their breath misting in the cold morning air. Candles fell, tapestries tore, and sacred manuscripts fluttered like wounded birds. The raiders ripped open chests of silver and gold, tossing relics into their sacks. Holy books were trampled underfoot as they searched for treasures. The monks, unarmed and untrained for war, had only their voices and their faith. Some begged for mercy in Latin. Others fled through the cloisters, hoping the stone walls would shield them. But the Vikings were not merciful that day. They struck down those who resisted and bound those they could sell as slaves. Flames began to lick the wooden beams as torches were hurled into corners, turning the calm monastery into a furnace of smoke and ash. The smell of burning parchment filled the air, centuries of knowledge lost in a matter of moments. Outside, the village fared no better. Fishermen's huts were raided, food stores were emptied, and livestock was driven toward the waiting ships. The cries of children mixed with the roar of the invaders. The sky, once gray, now glowed orange with fire. Yet, even in the chaos, the Vikings moved with a kind of discipline. They were not aimless marauders. They struck fast, took what they wanted, and left before reinforcements could arrive. To them, this was not cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was survival, wealth, and glory in a harsh world where the strong thrived and the weak fell silent. By the time the smoke thinned and the tide began to rise again, Lindisfarne was no longer the beacon of peace it had been at dawn. Its relics were gone, its halls defiled, and its people scattered or enslaved. The Vikings pushed their ships back into the sea, their dragon prows now heavy with plunder, their sails swelling with the cold northern wind. For the survivors left behind, only silence remained, broken stone, scorched earth, and questions that no prayer could answer. When the longships vanished beyond the horizon, Lindisfarne lay broken, its holy halls in ruins and its people in mourning. Smoke rose like a dark banner against the morning sky, a sign that something terrible had changed. The raid was not just a violent robbery. It was a message, one that would echo across the whole of Christian Europe. Messengers were sent out from the island, carrying tales of horror to neighboring kingdoms. They spoke of strange warriors from the sea, men who feared neither God nor king, who slaughtered monks and stole relics as if they were worthless trinkets. For many, this was more than a human attack. It felt like divine punishment. Priests called it a scourge from heaven, a test of faith, a sign that God's protection was faltering. In monasteries far and wide, fear took root. Scholars began writing about the heathen men who had descended upon the sacred island, describing them as demons with iron in their hands and fire in their hearts. Chroniclers recorded the raid with trembling ink, their words laced with dread. On the 8th of June, the ravaging of heathen men miserably destroyed God's church at Lindisfarne, with plunder and slaughter. Kings and nobles debated how such a thing could happen. Lindisfarne was not on the edge of the world. It was within reach of powerful kingdoms. Yet no armies had arrived in time. No walls had been strong enough to stop the raiders. Suddenly, the long coastlines of Britain and Francia felt exposed. The sea, once a path of trade and faith, had become a doorway for terror. The impact went beyond fear. The treasure stolen that day, crosses of gold, jeweled chalices, silver reliquaries, funded more raids, more ships, and more warriors. The Vikings had discovered something the Christian kingdoms had not expected. Their shores were rich, their defenses weak, and their monasteries overflowing with wealth. For the monks who survived, Lindisfarne became a wound that would never fully heal. Some rebuilt, some fled, and some carried their sacred relics inland to protect them from future attacks. But the legend of the raid grew with each telling. It was the spark that ignited the image of the Viking as the unstoppable sea warrior, brutal, fearless, and driven by a hunger that no prayer could quench. And in the halls of power, rulers began to ask themselves a new question. If these warriors could strike Lindisfarne, where would they strike next? Centuries have passed since that fateful day in 793 AD, yet the name Lindisfarne still lingers in history books, sagas, and school lessons. But what remains? A tale of brutality or a turning point that reshaped Europe? The truth is, it is both. The raid marked the dawn of what we now call the Viking Age. But its legacy is more than just bloodshed. For the Norse raiders, Lindisfarne was proof that distant lands were vulnerable and full of riches. It inspired more voyages, more daring expeditions, and eventually settlements that would stretch from the British Isles to the heart of Russia. It was a spark that lit a fire across the North Sea, a fire of exploration, conquest, and trade. For the Christian kingdoms, the lesson was harsh but transformative. Walls grew taller, coastal defenses stronger, and alliances tighter. The raid forced them to look outward, to fortify their shores and rethink their relationship with the sea. It exposed their weaknesses but also pushed them toward resilience. The story also became a symbol, told in monasteries as a warning against sin, preached in churches as a reminder of divine wrath, and retold in Viking halls as a boast of daring courage. Over time, myth and fact began to blur. Some accounts painted the raiders as demons sent from hell. Others remembered them as heroes who challenged a complacent world. Archaeologists today sift through the soil of Lindisfarne, uncovering fragments of that day: charred wood, lost coins, broken crosses. Their findings reveal a more complex picture. The Vikings were not monsters without reason. They were seafarers driven by survival, ambition, and the tides of history. So what is Lindisfarne to us now? It is a story of a clash between two worlds, one of prayer and parchment, the other of iron and sail. It is a reminder that history is rarely a single truth. It is a web of perspectives, fears, and survival. The raid was a tragedy for those who lived it, but it was also the beginning of an age that would shape Europe for centuries to come. As the waves still crash against the island's rocks today, the echoes remain, a warning that peace can be fragile, and that the sea, quiet as it seems, can carry change on its back at any moment.